Good morning. Today is Friday. It is Gimel Adar Aleph, the third of the first month of Adar. Tovshin Ayin Tes. We are in Teres Menachem, Sefer HaMamorim, Tovshin Yud Gimel, in the Mamar of Yud Beis Shvat, Yud Beis Tammuz, Tovshin Yud Gimel. Dibra Maschel starts on the Pasuk Leman Daas. We are on page Kuf Tzadik Zayin at the top. We are in the process of learning the relevance of Havayahu Elikim in man's service of Hashem. Hashem's giving force and Hashem's withholding force, as those two are mirrored in man's service of Hashem. And the Rebbe began to explain that this is a reference to the two modes of serving Hashem. The first, known as Avodas HaBirurim, the service of Hashem called the service of refinement, which is what we do when we do mitzvahs, when we engage with our environment. We interact with material things, and we lift them, we refine them. Just like it's called refinement, because just like in a refinery, when you refine gold, for example, you take the pselis, the waste. You separate the waste from the actual gold. Similarly, when we engage with physical things, with the physical world, and we utilize it for purposes of kedusha, of holiness, and service of Hashem, we refine it. We lift out the sparks of holiness from the rest of it, and we lift it into the domain of holiness. Then there is the Avodas Hashem, service of Hashem, known as Avodas HaNisyonos, serving Hashem through tests. The difference between the two is that in the former, concerning Avodas HaBirurim, which is most of the things that we do, there's a Shulchan Aruch, there's a code of Jewish law. We know what are the do's and what are the don'ts. Those are the rules of engagement, so to speak. So that's limited. That's based on what we would call tam vadas. These are things that we could relate to, and this is what you do, this is what you don't do, and so on and so forth. Whereas when we talk about Avodas HaNisyonos, the service of Hashem through tests, the way to withstand the test is that despite there being no prospect of being able to withstand it, we make this strong, steadfast decision to withstand that situation regardless of what is being thrown at us, which is basically a position of l'mayla metam v'das, beyond rationality. Makes no sense, but we go for it anyway. So those are the two differences, those are the two modes of serving Hashem, represented in Havaya and Elikim. Avodas HaBirurim being the mirror of Elikim, and Avodas HaNisyonos being the mirror of Havaya Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now the Rebbe goes in and dissects Avodas HaNisyonos tests, the mode of serving Hashem through tests, in more detail. Page Kuf Tzadik Zayin at the top. Ube'inyan HaNisyonos Gufa, and in the matter of tests itself, Yesh Kama V'Kama Dargis. There are numerous levels. Matzinu Kama V'Kama Psukim B'negei L'inyan HaNisyonos. Shehu V'Kama Ma'amorim. As we find a number of Torah verses in relation to tests, which are brought in a number of Hasidic discourses, until we reach the highest level, the highest level of tests, which is brought in these various verses and brought in Chassidus, which is what? As the verse states, Avraham. And Hashem tested Avraham. Which test are we talking about? The test of the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, his son, on the altar. Just as an aside, the Rebbe said that the idea of tests is related to Shem Havaya. It's interesting that in this posuk it says V'ho Elikim Nisas Avraham. But that's a separate discussion. So, what is the test? This is not all tests are equal. This is a test which is given to a whole tzaddik, a complete tzaddik. Somebody that's totally righteous. What does that mean? This is not the same type of test which is described in the verse where it states that Hashem has given the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, tests in order to test them whether he will follow my Torah or not. So what does the pasuk describe over there? That the test is being given to see if the person will still cleave to Hashem, or despite the fact that he's facing hardship, whatever hardship the Jewish people were facing at the time, I believe it was in the desert, right? To say, am I sticking with Hashem nonetheless? But what's the choice there? To follow Hashem or not follow Hashem? Clearly, this is not a test which relates to a tzaddik gomer, to a whole tzaddik, because a tzaddik cleaves to Hashem irrespective of what the situation is. That's why he's a tzaddik. So what is a test of a tzaddik? The Nisayin, because this type of test that is described in this verse, L'mana nasenu, I'm testing him whether he will follow my Torah or not. Lo shayach is a tzaddik gomer. Doesn't come into the frame of reality for a complete tzaddik. It's not a test. It's not a question for a complete tzaddik whether he's going to follow Hashem's Torah or not. It's a given that he will. Why? She'ein le'yetzer hara. Because the description of a complete tzaddik, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, is that a tzaddik gomer, a complete tzaddik, doesn't have a yetzer hara, doesn't have an evil inclination. Why? Ki hargei b'tainis. This is a direct quote from Tanya. Because he slayed him through fasting. And obliquely the Rebbe says, or even a higher level of tzaddik, and there's even a higher level of tzaddik than this, and there is a reference in number 61 to a number of places. Over there, the Rebbe explains there are two types of complete tzaddik. One is that the evil inclination will always cooperate with the good inclination, but it could be in two ways. Either by subjugation, he's given up, right? But it's more in a forced way, so to speak. Whereas there's another way where the tzaddik transforms the evil inclination, and the evil inclination now becomes harnessed and a power for good, and actually motivates the person, wants to be connected to Hashem in its own right. Let's not go into the nuances, because then we have to understand the difference between a tzaddik she'eina gomer and a beinani, etc. But that's a whole discussion in Tanya, and in the various references. You could look it up in the various references in number 61. The Rebbe says this is the difference between the level of David HaMelech. This phrase ki hargei b'tainis, that he slaughtered him through fasting. The Alter Rebbe says in relation to David HaMelech, King David, who said, "V'libi cholol b'kirbi," we say in the Psalms, my heart is hollow within me. What does it mean, hollow within me? So the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, Ki ein le'yetzer hara ki hargei b'tainis, he has no evil inclination because he slaughtered him through fasting. He says that's one level, but a higher level is by Avraham. Avraham was at a higher level where it says, Hishalech lefonai v'heyei tomim. We'll see that in a minute. Walk before me and be whole. Tomim means that he's not missing anything. In fact, he's taken whatever he has and he's transformed it as forces for good. Certainly when we talk about the forefathers, particularly concerning Avraham, the first of the forefathers. This test that we're referring to over here, from the verse, this relates to the 10th test, which was which one? The Nisayin of the Akedah, the Nisayin of binding Yitzchak, the test of binding Yitzchak on the altar. So this was the 10th test. After he has already reached a state of complete wholesomeness in his connection and the service of Hashem. As the verse states in Lech Lecha, Hishalech lefanai ve'yei tamim, walk before me and be whole. What was that a reference to? That was a reference to Milah, when Hashem instructed him to go through a circumcision. It is then that Hashem made him king over all his 248 limbs. Up until that point, he was missing one because he wasn't circumcised. Once he was circumcised, he became king over all his limbs. That's why his name, a hey was added. The letter hey was added to his name. His name was Avram without a hey. And Hashem changed his name to Avraham, to add a hey. Why a hey? Because at that point he became king over all his limbs. L'rameis, this is a hint. Al Ashlita, to the fact that he ruled Gamal Hey Ivorim, also on the 5 limbs she'ena b'shusa shel Adam that are not within the domain of man. They're usually not in control of man. So, and when did the test of the Akedah take place? The test of the binding of Yitzchak took place after he was circumcised and after he became king over all his the 5 limbs that a person normally is not. So he was totally complete in his connection to Hashem, in the service of Hashem. And then Hashem gave him a test, the test of binding Yitzchak on the Akedah. So obviously we're not talking about a usual test. We're not talking about a test to test the person whether he will serve Hashem or not serve Hashem. He's whole. He's complete. And then there's a test. So what type of test are we talking about? That's what the Rebbe is going to explain. But before we go on, this phrase, when he talks about the 5 limbs which are not Birshusa Shel Adam, could you pass me a Gemara in the Dorim, please? Thank you very much.
Make it fair.
Thank you.
Because I think we
Thank you.
speak about hands, legs, and mouth.
If you ask him about bricks and mortar, he can talk to you about hands and legs.
I think
And
he said in there hands, legs, and mouth. No, here.
in the Dorim Lamed Beis.
I opened it in the phone.
Says the Gemara, Rami bar Abba. Rami bar Abba said, Ksiv, it says in the verse Avram, without a hey, Uksiv Avraham, with a hey. It's written Avram, it's written Avraham. Why? Hashem first made him king over 243 limbs. And in the end, he made him king over 248 limbs. Elohein. These are the ones that he made him king over in the end. The 2 eyes, the 2 ears, and the tip of the bris organ. Okay, that's the Gemara. So the Rebbe, let's look at what the Rebbe says. That he became king over the 5 limbs that are not within the control of man. The Gemara doesn't use that expression, that are not in control of man. Let's see what the Ran says. That in the beginning Hashem made him king over the limbs that are within his domain, that he should be guarded from committing an iniquity. But the eyes and the ears of man are not in his control. Because he's forced to see. He's forced to see or hear whatever is thrown at him in the environment that he is. After he was circumcised, Hashem made him king even on these. So he doesn't refer to the bris organ, right? Even though in the beginning of the Ran he says that first he was king over the limbs that are within the domain of man, before the bris. After that he became king over those limbs that are not within the domain of man. So that maybe could mean also that it's talking about Reisha Gvia, the bris organ. But the actual language, this phrase, Hey Evorim she'einam b'shusa shel Adam, is from the Medrash, I believe. And over there it says Shtei Yinayim, Shtei Oznayim, and I think the nose. We have to check that out. So before we jump to conclusions, just wanted to point out. But even though from the Ran, it seems a bit like the Rebbe, even though he doesn't say it exactly like that, but it seems to be more along the lines that the Rebbe says. But be that as it may. So, what's the question? The question is, what type of test was Avraham Avinu presented? If he was completely whole in his service of Hashem, right? He now became king over all his limbs. Obviously, it's not a test that all of a sudden, is he going to choose to follow Hashem or not? He's perfect. So what test is it? How do you test a person like that? So in order to understand that, we have to understand what was the test of binding Yitzchak. What did the test consist of? V'yuvon, this will be understood by first prefacing the question. There's a question, why do we relate the test of the binding of Yitzchak as a test for Avram? Where's Yitzchak in all of this? It should have been related to whom? Yitzchak. He's the guy that's being slaughtered, for crying out loud. So why is it a test for Avram? He's the one that's being slaughtered. Yitzchak. Yitzchak is the one that was bound on the altar. And it's called a test for Avram. And Rabbi Menachem Mendel from Horodok, who was one of the teachers of the Alter Rebbe, of the Balatanya. Right? And after the Mezitch Magid, the Magid of Mezitch, passed away, was Nestalik, the Mendel Horodoker took on the leadership, was appointed leader for a while. He then went up to Eretz Yisrael, decided to make Aliyah, so to speak. He went to Eretz Yisrael. The Alter Rebbe wanted to come along, but the Mendel Horodoker insisted that he stay, and he should become the leader of the Chassidim that remained back in Europe, in Russia. And so he was one of the teachers of the Alter Rebbe for that period. What does he explain? Concerning this, the main test wasn't the actual binding of Yitzchak on the altar. In other words, offering up Yitzchak as a offering to Hashem, binding him and potentially, shechting him, slaughtering him and bringing him as an offering to Hashem. That wasn't the test. Why? Because relative to the level of the forefathers' service of Hashem, where they were serving Hashem like a chariot to a horse, meaning to say, they were completely nullified to Hashem's will. Or to say it in a different way, whatever Hashem wanted, they wanted. That was their will. In all their matters, in all their limbs, even their material, physical matters, in their very existence, they were a chariot for godliness. So for a person at that level, it's not considered a test to give away their life for Hashem. Why? Because that's what Hashem wants, that's what they want. It's not a test. That's their normal, that's the way they react. That's their instinctive reaction. Their instinctive reaction is to do what Hashem wants. Doesn't matter what it is. If Hashem wants me to live, that's what I want, instinctively. It's like breathing. If Hashem decides that I should offer myself as a offering to Him, that's what they want. It's strange for us to be able to relate to it because we're not in that frame of reality, right? But for someone in that state of consciousness, that's the way they react. So what was the main idea of the test of the binding of Yitzchak? The main point of the test was that Avram did not excuse me, Avram did not doubt or question in his mind Hashem's the way Hashem is approaching this. Why? What happened? Hashem told Avram at the covenant that He made with him that I'm going to give you children, offspring, and they're going to be as numerous as the stars of the sky and the sand by the sea. Right? So Avram said to Hashem, I have a son, Yishmael. He says, no, Yitzchak, through Yitzchak you're going to have, that's the line will continue through Yitzchak. I'm referring to Yitzchak. When was that? Before he told him to bind Yitzchak on the Akedah. Yitzchak was 37 years old when it came to the Akedah, to being bound on the altar. It's physically impossible to be offered to Hashem as an offering and depart physical life and give birth to children. It's just not possible. So here he had an absolute contradiction. On the one hand, Hashem said to him, right? Yitzchak is going to be the father of that. Your line is going to continue through Yitzchak. What I'm referring to is the line of Yitzchak. Before he even had a chance to get married and have children, he says, offer him up as what? As an offering to me on the altar. Whilst he was very happy and keen to fulfill Hashem's will, and so did Yitzchak, but it's still physically impossible for that to come true, for Hashem's promise to come true. if he were to, in fact, go through with the act of offering him on the altar. So that was a test. So who was that a test? Whom did Hashem promise that? Avraham. He didn't promise that to Yitzchak. So that's why it's mainly referred to as a test for whom? For Avraham rather than for Yitzchak. So Avraham was able to say to Hashem, yesterday you said to me, that Yitzchak is the one that will be called your offspring. Then you sort of, it seems like you changed your mind and you said, take your son and bring him up as an oila offering, as a complete offering. And nonetheless, he strengthened himself and he banished this contradictory thought from his mind. And what did he do? He went ahead with alacrity, with agility, with a spring in his step, to go fulfill the commandment of Hashem in the Akedah. That's why this test is related specifically to Avraham. Because for a period of time, what's the point? Now he's getting to the bottom line of what he's trying to express. For a period of time, Avraham approached serving Hashem based on rationality. As the Medrash says, how did Hashem become known to Avraham? He did this through his own, as it says, his kidneys advised, made him come up with these ideas. It says in Talmud, kidneys is the one that gives person ideas and so on and so forth. He sort of discovered it. How? It brings a parable of a man who saw a certain capital city. And he said, is it possible for this capital city not to have a ruler, somebody that runs it? But another place it brings, that first he saw the sun and the moon, he thought they must be running the world. So the sun during the day, then it set. He said it can't be the sun, because if it would be running the world, it would have to be there all the time. Then he saw the moon. He said it must be the moon, but then the moon set. So through a process, he went through fire, water, air, until his kidneys have taught him, meaning to say he somehow, through self-discovery, he came to the conclusion to recognize the one who said and the world became, meaning to say Hashem, as we say in Baruch Shem, Baruch Amar, the one who uttered and the world came into being. So in other words, he used some process of deduction or some rational model paradigm to come to the conclusion that what? That Hashem exists. So this means avodah al pitam vadas, serving Hashem within the frame of rationality. This was the main point of the test for Avraham, despite the fact that what? That for a period of time, his approach to godliness and to serving Hashem was rationality based. Nevertheless, when he came to this test, which made absolutely no sense whatsoever, he did not doubt or rethink or double think Hashem's behavior, how Hashem is approaching this. It's not only that he said he had a question and he put it out of his mind. The question didn't come up into his mind in the first place. That this seems to be a change in Hashem's will, because first he said Yitzchak will continue the line, and now he says bring him up as an offering. In the intellect, there is no room at all to answer how these two things can coexist. That they should both coexist. And on the one hand, Yitzchak is the one that will be called your offspring, your line. And then, at the same time, offer him up as an oila offering on the altar before he even has a chance to have children. Through this test, what was revealed by Avraham was the Yechidah Nefesh level of his soul, the very essence of his soul. As is known, that tests reveal the essence of the soul of man, and from the point of view of the Yechidah aspect of the soul, the test becomes nullified. Meaning to say that one withstands the test, and we see that it wasn't a test even in the first place. And in fact, Hashem said to Avram, we have to stop this davening, where he said, all I meant was, bring him up into the altar. Bring him up. Put him onto the altar. He didn't say, put him up on the altar and slaughter him. It was obviously, from the way Hashem phrased it, it seemed that was his intention. So basically Hashem was saying to Avraham, after he fulfilled the test, so he phrased it in such a way that Avraham should be under the impression, so to speak, that he has to go through with slaughtering Yitzchak as an oil offering. But once you put him onto the altar, Hashem said, take him down, because you've already fulfilled the ha'aleyu. You already brought him up. Once you brought him up, you withstood the test. So this is the idea of tests. What's the point? So the Rebbe is talking about a test for a tzaddik, whereby it's not a test. Are you testing him whether, you're tempting him to commit an iniquity, to break a mitzvah or to do an avera, and you're testing him whether he'll go through with the negative act or he'll stick to being connected to Hashem. No, for Avraham, that's not relevant. He's already, after the bris milah, he's already complete. What test are we talking about? A test which challenges his model of avodas Hashem, his model of serving Hashem. A test that challenges his rationally based paradigm. That is Shem Havaya. L'mayla metam b'das. Right? Whereas the serving Hashem based on the model of rationality is Shem Elokim. In the Havaya Elokim, as I've explained earlier in the Mamar. More about that in Mitzvah Hashem on Sunday morning.